Welcome to the SDG Warriors podcast. In today's episode, we'll be in conversation with Dr. Tammara Soma. Dr. Tammara is a research director and the co-founder of the Food Systems Lab, the first social innovation lab tackling food systems and food waste issues in Canada. Dr. Tammara is an assistant professor at the School of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University, where she conducts research on issues pertaining to food system planning, community-based research, waste management, and the circular economy. Prior to SFU, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto, the Food Equity Coordinator at New College. Her dissertation investigated the factors that influence urban household food consumption and food wasting practices in Indonesia, and the ways in which food systems consideration can improve urban planning decision making. She has published her work in the journals International Planning Studies, Local Environment, Built Environment Indonesia, Journal of Agriculture, and Food System and Community Development. She's a co-editor with C. Reynolds, J. Lizelle, and C. Spring of the Routledge Handbook of Food Waste. She is a 2014 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Doctoral Scholar, a Joseph Armand Bombardier SSHRC CGS Doctoral Fellow, an International Development Research Center Doctoral Award recipient, and a SSHRC Top 5 Storyteller finalist. We are so honored to have you today with us, Dr. Tammara, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited too. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so happy that there's an SDG warrior group that is out there doing such amazing work.
Well, ma'am, we can't wait to get to know more about your research and what you do every day to empower students and researchers around the world. So before we begin with the questions, to help our listeners audibly visualize the whole experience, can you tell us where are you located, what's the weather like outside, and what can you see from your window right now?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I am here right now on Burnaby Mountain. It's in the city of Burnaby near Vancouver in the province of British Columbia, Canada. And so Burnaby Mountain is on the unceded and ancestral and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And right now, it just suddenly became sunny, but it was raining and it was chilly. And basically, we have a weather forecast of 10 days straight of rain, which is going to be quite intense. And also, I can see lots of mountains around me. It's very beautiful.
Likewise, back here in Bangalore, we are having a festive season of Diwali, and we still have a sugar rush of all the mithais that we ate yesterday. And it's a beautiful chilly day and a rainy day as well. It's been raining for the past couple of days, and I can see the beautiful night sky outside my window.
Oh, that's nice. And sending you Diwali blessings. I used to celebrate Diwali with my very best friend from Nepal, and we used to eat the best treats and light the candles. So yes, I'm celebrating in spirit with you.
Well, happy Diwali to you, Dr. Tammara. Well, could you explain what you do like you would to a 10-year-old?
What I'm doing right now is I'm researching everything about food. And so what I do is I work with farmers, I work with people who eat, I work with people who sell food, and I also work with how to manage the waste that comes, when we eat food, right? So we have food waste, we have packaging waste. And so, when you are SDG warriors, so you know the importance of SDG 12, sustainable production and consumption, and you also know about zero hunger. So I'm really interested in all of that, like how to make sustainable agriculture, how to make sure that people can eat good quality, healthy, nutritious food, and how can we waste less? Because, we don't want to produce all of this food only for it to go wasted. So it's a whole cycle.
Right. Well, we were also curious to know that what does a typical day in your life look like?
A typical day is very busy. So I'm a mother of 3. I have 3 kids, a 14-year-old, 10, and then 7-year-old. And I'm also a professor at the Simon Fraser University in the School of Resource and Environmental Management. And I'm also the research director of the Food Systems Lab. So it's very busy. and on a typical day, I would answer a lot of emails, of course, but I also run a lot of research projects. And so I would do research with my students. I would interview community members. I would also teach. So I teach an SDG course. I teach a course on Introduction to Sustainability. Maybe if you want to come to Canada and take the course, I'm sure you will get an A because you're already in it. So I teach an SDG course. We have a Sustainable Development Certificate here at Simon Fraser University. And so I teach that course. I teach a course on Introduction to Planning, and I also teach a course on planning for sustainable food systems. So it's a mix of research and teaching, and also making sure that I am home and I take good care of my family, and I love to cook. So I also cook.
You've got so much wonderful stuff on your plate, and we were very curious to know that what exactly got you interested to come to your field.
Yeah, so I got interested in my field, I guess maybe because I was born and raised in Indonesia. So I grew up in Indonesia, and I just remember growing up as a child, seeing all of these beautiful rice paddies, the rice paddy fields and like farms and everything. And a lot of them were just basically paved over. They were gobbled up and they were paved over to build, malls and buildings and everything. And it's kind of sad for me to see, the farmlands being paved over. But then there's that part of me, because I grew up in a very agriculture country, Indonesia. Then there's another part of me where my parents always told me from a very young age, my mom especially, Tammara, eat every single grain of rice. If you don't eat it, the rice will cry. And so since a young age, I was told that, and that kind of always made me have this connection with food and not wasting food. So even that little message from me back then, it's still influencing me now in the things that I do with my research.
Absolutely. Even our parents back here in India tell us that you should always take that much food on your plate that is actually required, that your tummy can actually digest. And you should not take more, because there are so many children out there who need that food, who are crying, who sleep at nights without having anything. And they literally die of hunger. And that is something that we should take care of. So talking about food wastage, we can't wait to ask more questions about the the food apocalypse.
Yes,
so coming
right.
on to those questions, well, we wanted to know, what is exactly a food apocalypse, and are there any indicators for that?
Yeah, and so there are the one thing about the food apocalypse, like I use the term food apocalypse, but really what I'm trying to refer to is a food crisis. But sometimes people don't, I think people just, I think we're still taking it for granted. Many of us take food for granted. And that's why we have the situation where we have, on the one hand, we have so much food waste. And then on the other hand, that billions of people globally go hungry. And that's why we have SDG 2 on zero hunger. And so when I talk about the food apocalypse, is a different terminology from what Dr. Sir Beddington was talking about, the perfect storm. Remember, I talk about the perfect storm and explain that according to Sir John Beddington, if we don't increase food production, if we don't increase, there's like water use and energy use to produce food to feed this growing population, we are going to have a massive conflict, right? Massive chaos with water scarcity and all of that scary stuff that I talk about when we were talking about the perfect storm. So the food apocalypse is that we are in a crisis right now where at any point in time we are so vulnerable that just in one day, with the border disruption or with a natural disaster, if we don't plan long term, and that if we don't plan for an emergency, we are going to be harmed. And it's not just going to be, we can't just say like, oh, it's just those people that are going hungry. No, we're talking globally. So it's time now that we start addressing the issue of food crisis seriously.
Right, and given the looming instances, the looming damages that are being caused due to the insect crisis, that is the insect apocalypse, the climate change, and the water crisis as well, this is something that we should look into. So when we are talking about all these different crises in so many fields, like insects, like water, like climate change, which is happening big time, well, which plants are likely to survive a food crisis?
Yeah, and so that question is good, but it's also going to have to be on a case by case basis. And the reason for that is when it comes to climate change can create these very I hate to say that it's random, but basically in some cases it will be not enough water. In other cases it will be too much water. In some cases it will be a lot of fires, right? In some cases it will be like the snap winter, like meaning that suddenly out of the blue there's hail and there's snow that's unexpected. So things like that has happened in the summer where, wait a minute, this is the time when the plants are supposed to be growing, and then suddenly with this cold snap all the plants freeze. Or what happens is it's winter time, but then suddenly for 2 weeks straight the weather is really warm and all of the plants start blooming because they think like, oh, it's time for us to bloom because now it's springtime. Oh, no, it's not yet. It's not springtime yet. So it really depends on the plants. And the one thing that I will say is that, of course, when it comes to issues around drought, we need to have the appropriate plant for that, to target that. And then when it comes to issues of like heat, we need to have plants that can tolerate that. But I also think that it's so important to invest also in some of the plan B, which is like indoor agriculture. So indoor growing, thinking about alternatives. I think we need to have many different plants, not plants, but plan to make sure that we have all of our strategies covered.
So taking that forward, you can have indoor gardens, you can start small based agricultures in your gardens, in your balconies, in your verandas, and in your schools as well, where you can start a club and you can plant all these different kinds of crops and you can literally harvest them, which can make your learning truly impactful, like we have in grade 7, we have in grade 8, we have grade 10, we learn about agriculture, but we really don't get to apply that. We actually think that it's just the farmers who are doing that. But we need to understand that what we are learning right now, it should really be implemented in our lives as well. And that is the reason that we are learning it. And that is the reason that we are connecting with researchers like you, ma'am, so that we can make this impact in our daily lives. Well, coming to the topic of food wastage, in your opinion, what are the root causes of food wastage?
Oh, so that is a good question. And the root causes of wastage is very, very complex. But basically, in a nutshell, if I were to simplify, is that we have a food system that's very much focused on overproducing to lower the cost of food. But at the same time, it's in a way very exploitative to nature. So the industrial food system, in producing so much, it saturates the market, right? And in a way, it drops the cost of food, but at the same time, it also results in overbuying. It results in too much food so that it actually cannot be sourced. So if you think like, oh, but if we produce a lot of food and the food prices go down, then that should be a good thing. But that's not necessarily the case when it's not done in an efficient way. So for example, like a farmer in Kenya, they would grow all of these green beans, but it's not being consumed by the people in Kenya. It's being shipped to a supermarket, say in Canada or in the United States. And then the supermarkets might say, oh, well, these green beans are too curvy, they are too short, or they're too long. And then so suddenly 60% of the food products are wasted because it's rejected, because it doesn't look the way that the supermarkets want to. So what I'm trying to say in a kind of roundabout way is that food has become so much of a commodity. It's not being valued for its ability to actually nourish people, to actually be part of, to nourish your culture. It's more of like, it's just viewed as a commodity that can be discarded if they want to. And that's why even though these green beans from Kenya or from India or from Indonesia, even if they're good quality, they're still edible, it gets wasted. So that's a big problem.
Right. When we look at such unfair practices going around food systems around the world, we were curious to know what would a genuinely safe and sustainable and a fair food system look like.
Yeah, and so that is such a big question because, and a good question, because when we think of a sustainable food system, it's so important that you insert the word fair, right? Because we can't have sustainability without fairness, without justice. And so there's this word called food sovereignty. I don't know if you've heard about it, but you've maybe heard of food security, right? Food security, food sovereignty. So the one thing about food sovereignty and what is important about the sovereignty piece is that people should be able to make choices. Countries should be able to make choices. What happens right now in many countries of the world, the countries themselves don't have very much say about what types of food that they grow, how much. A lot of it is dictated by international trade and international power. And so people, for example, if they say, well, we want to support local food, or we want to support more sustainable production, sometimes that is not necessarily possible. And so they don't have the sovereignty, they don't have the choice to decide. And so this means that, for example, for me, if I want to make sure that farmers are paid well and that the laborers that are laboring in the farm gets paid well, that needs sovereignty. And without that sovereignty, it's very hard to change the system, because right now our system is based on reducing costs at all costs, so that the environment suffers, people and labor suffers, and eventually the economy suffers, because even though technically the food is supposed to cost less, people are not able to purchase it anyway because they're paid less. You see, so it's an exploitative system. And so in a sustainable, fair food system, there would not be that exploitation.
Right. Even back here in India, we have been studying that there has been a big shift from the primary sector to the tertiary sector, that people are not going into the farming sector and they're rather moving into the service sector. Even though there are lots of people employed in farming, there's disguised unemployment over there, which is a very, very big issue over here. And even though they are growing so many crops over here in India and they have been selling it to all the people, they're filling all our tummies. But even after doing that, the farmers over here, they're not getting much credit over here, because the government says that they should not be growing that, to be honest, and they should be growing some other crops that are known as cash crops, which can be exported outside. So
yeah, and that's exactly so like that. Remember when I talked about the commodity, like, so food is just seen as a commodity. So that's what I mean. Food is just seen as a cash crop. It's not nourishing. It's not healing. It's not like supporting the farmers. And that's the big piece, is that when the farmers grow food, they have to pay the cost of the water. They have to pay the cost of growing and buying the seeds and everything. That is actually not being covered by the cost of food. So like when people buy the food, that money doesn't necessarily go to the farmers, so that's the big missing piece. And I'm very glad that you brought that up.
Well, we are looking forward to listening more about the urban sector as well as the farming sector. So moving towards the urban sector, can you tell us more about closed loop cities?
Yeah, so I actually, in terms of closed loop cities, in the food system, the system that we want to support is a circular system, not a linear system. And what we have right now is a very linear system. So if you think about big cities like Jakarta or like Toronto or Vancouver, or in Bangalore, for example, that's also a big city, Delhi, sometimes like the food would be coming from another country, right? And then after that, the waste would not necessarily go into food production. The waste maybe goes into a dump site, like a big mountain full of trash, or just a landfill. And that's linear. So a closed loop city thinks about the whole cycle from the point of food production all the way to the consumption and then back to food production. That's why it's closed loop, because we're not wasting. Everything is interconnected. So an example of that, an old example of that in the United Kingdom is something called garden cities. So in the garden cities, the cities were planned so that, there's a certain number of people, and then there are farms around it, and then in the farms supply food to the communities would eat it, and then the food scraps go back to the farm, and then so it continues to be like a closed loop cycle. But right now we don't have that, and I think we need more of that, because right now that all of that food waste is just emitting methane and contributing to greenhouse gas emission and climate change.
Right. Interconnectedness to reduce fossil fuels, interconnectedness to create closed loop cities. That is something that every city out there must implement at the earliest, so that we can address this issue and we move a step closer towards achieving SDG 2. Right. So moving on to your research, could you share insights from your research that you think most people won't be aware about?
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Okay. Well, I have so many different research projects going on right now, but I think the one thing that people are unaware about is that sometimes and I come from the food systems lab, so a lot of my thinking is around food, but sometimes food related, so solutions to solve what is seemingly to be a food issue is not always going to be food related. And let me explain to you. So for example, when we talk about SDG 2.0 hunger, sometimes we think, okay, so the solution for hunger is that we just need to give people food, right? And that's it. But the thing is, we also need to look at other complexities. For example, well, why did they go hungry to begin with? What are some of the issues? If we start digging deeper, we start seeing, oh, wow, it turns out that in this community, housing costs has increased significantly. So people start to cut out on food because they can't afford housing. Right? And then in another situation, we could say, well, why are people hungry? There's so much food all around. Oh, that's because even though there's a lot of supermarkets all around, there's food all around, their income is very minimum because there's not a minimum wage. For example, like there's not a proper minimum livable wage. So what I say, and also with food waste, here's another example. With food waste, a lot of people talk about how they waste food because so like the rapid urbanization is one of the drivers of food waste. And because people get really busy, they don't have time, they don't have time to think. So even though they went grocery shopping, they go and eat out, and then suddenly the food in their home goes bad, right? And so sometimes it's interesting to, when we think about the food system and food related solutions, we also need to think about the drivers, right? So with zero hunger, yes, there are food solutions that we need to do. For example, we should support urban agriculture. We should support like different food growing activities. At the same time, we also need to think about how can we make sure that there's affordable housing? How can we make sure that people are making enough money? Because it can't just be that we rely on charities to solve all of the hunger issues. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Back here in India, I remember watching this movie recently in which they had showed us that there were lots of children who stopped going to school and their education was being affected. And even they were going hungry and they were very malnutrition. The school was actually putting water inside the milk. Like there was less milk but more of water. So the children did not like to obviously eat that, and that water was also not from a good place. It was dirty water. So that is the reason why they stopped going to school. So basically, zero hunger can also have an effect on other SDGs, and therefore it basically is all interconnected. If we don't focus on one of them, all others will be affected. So I totally get what you're trying to convey over here, Dr. Tammara.
Exactly. SDG 1 connects to SDG 2, right? So if you address the poverty issue, you also address the hunger issue. It's all interconnected. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that is why it is so very important to focus on all of them at the same time. And we don't have much time left. We just have about 9 years left to achieve them all, which is really scary. The next question, which is very relevant, consider the lists which are coming out today. Given the alarming results on the Global Hunger Index, which came out a few days back, what can we as students do to prevent a food apocalypse?
Wow. Well, first of all, I will just say that this podcast, this effort that you're doing, you are doing such a great job in trying to bring awareness and trying to, to bring this issue forward, which is so important, educating your fellow students. The one thing is so just to let you know, in Canada, so Canada is considered a wealthy country, but Canada is one of the only OECD countries that does not have a proper national school meal program. Right? So there are children in Canada going to school hungry, which is completely unacceptable. It's really shocking, to be honest. And so the one thing that's really important, I think, is for students, it's so important for you to say we need not only school food programming, in terms of providing the support, the literacy on how to cook, how to learn about agriculture, how to respect, agriculture from a very young age, because I think that it's so easy to not value agriculture. We value celebrities, they get so much money, but we don't value the farmers that feed us. And then another piece is like really to make sure that children can go to school with full belly so that they can learn and then they can do amazing things, because that's the very basic foundation, right? When children don't have enough money, they can't go to school, they come to school and they're hungry, it's really hard for them to really digest and to really, do well, and then go on and have a better future. So I think if there's like one little thing that you can do, it's not little actually, it's actually pretty big, but it's so important to advocate for stronger support in schools, for school meal programs, for school food related education. I think that's very, very important.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned over here, student voice, teacher voice, then the voices of the principals, all of them are interdependent on each other. If the principal does not function well, the whole system crashes. If the teachers don't function well, the whole system crashes. If the parents don't listen to the students, whole system crashes again. So that is why it is very important to remove those barriers, talk to one another, spread awareness, talk about issues that are real, that are happening right now, so that we can solve each other's problems and make the world a better place. So now we are going to be starting with a very interesting round, the rapid fire round, where we'll be asking you very fun questions. So are you ready, Dr. Tammara?
Ready, okay.
Okay, so what was your favorite subject in school and why did you like it?
I love history because I just love remembering facts and information and learning about the past.
Now, what are the best and the worst parts of your job right now?
The best part is working with students and doing research. And the worst part is answering emails. I don't like answering too many emails. There's just too many.
All right. Now, coming to the most ironic question of this podcast. What is your favorite food and why do you like it? Is it because of a scientific or a research reason, or is it because it's just yummy?
Oh my goodness, that is the hardest question ever, especially for someone like me. Well, I will just say that this is too hard because my favorite food changes all the time. But I will just say I love Indonesian food so much, especially when it's hot noodles. Like it's called mie baso, which is like noodles with little balls in them, and they're so soothing and so delicious. And that's because it reminds me back of home.
Well, talking about home, is there a person who has inspired you to reach where you are today? And can you tell us more about that person?
Of course. So I will say that my mom is such a wonderful person. She has inspired me so much. Well, actually my mom and my dad, but if I can only choose one, with my mom. And that's because I mentioned to you her teaching, right? From the very early age about not wasting food, about thinking about the connection with food. And that's why I'm here today doing research about food, 30 years later.
Well, the most best thing about this podcast is to listen to the answers of this question, because we've had so many answers to this, but the one common answer which stands apart from everyone is the answer mom, because explorers who have been working in forests and even people who have been diving in oceans, they have all said that their mom inspires them, because every mom on this planet is a superwoman and someone that every person should dream to become of. Well, now we come to the most important questions of this podcast. Are there any words of inspiration that were given to you that you would like to pass along to the others through this podcast?
Wow. In terms of word of inspiration, I will just say that, so I want to share a teaching from my faith. And so in my faith of Islam, there is this saying, the ink of a scholar is holier than the blood of a martyr. And what does that mean? What it means is that what you're doing right now, the words, the knowledge, the papers that you write, that ink of scholarly knowledge is holy, it's sacred. So being a scholar is something that's seen as very sacred. We don't want wars, we don't want conflict, what we want is lots of opportunities to exchange knowledge, to learn from one another. And I think that has inspired me to also be a professor, because I think that this is an important work and what you are doing is an important work, and it's considered sacred work in my religion.
Absolutely. All the goodness of this world, whether it's in the form of love, whether it is in the form of achieving the SDGs themselves, they should all be a part of our faith so that we all can grow together and also make the Almighty happy that their children are prospering and growing every single day. Well, now before we wrap up with the podcast, what is the one message that you would like to give to the change makers of today, the student change makers and the youth?
I will say that your voice matters. Your voice really, really matters. And in fact, if you see what's happening around the world, politicians, government, they are listening to the voices of the children because you are going to be the leaders, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now. And so I will just say, like, don't ever stop speaking up. Don't ever think that your voice is too small, because now with social media, with podcasts, with Twitter and all of these things, you see how our path cross. I'm from Canada, you're from India, and our path cross. So I will continue to fight for SDG warriors. I will continue to share with my students the work that you're doing. And that just goes to show that your voice truly matters and will make it international, right?
And thank you so much, Dr. Tammara, for sparing time and coming over here to address the larger student audience who are watching this podcast and educating them with such important things which are very much required to achieve the sustainable development goals. It was an honor having you over here, Dr. Tammara.
Oh, it's such an honor for me. Anytime.